This is Channel Space Traveler, where forgotten Star Wars history comes to light. You've been told the Jedi are the heroes, guardians of peace, keepers of balance. But what if I told you the Jedi weren't right at all? What if they were the enforcers of a corrupt regime? Just another face of galactic oppression. What if everything you believed about the Jedi was wrong? What if the so-called guardians of peace were actually the instruments of control? We've grown up seeing the Jedi as noble warriors, defenders of democracy, and champions of the light side of the Force. But beneath the lightsabers and flowing robes lies a much darker truth. One the Galactic Republic never wanted you to question. Before there was ever a clone war, before Order 66, there was something far more dangerous spreading across the galaxy. Colonization, oppression, genocide, all under the banner of peace. How did it all begin? Long before the Jedi claimed to uphold justice, humanity spread across the stars using two terrifyingly powerful technologies. A hyperspace travel, which gave them dominance over time and space, and planetary terraforming, which let them reshape entire worlds in their image. Worlds that already had life, worlds with indigenous civilizations, burned, reshaped, and repopulated to suit human needs. Atmospheres were changed, ecosystems collapsed, and the native species, if they survived at all, they were enslaved, or worse, exterminated. The Jedi weren't just standing by, they were leading the way. As elite enforcers of the Republic, they protected human interests at all costs, even when it meant destroying entire cultures. Yes, the Jedi abolished slavery, but only after the colonies had stripped those planets of everything valuable. And even then, the former slaves became the Republic's lowest-class citizens, living under the very system that crushed their ancestors. So, were the Jedi ever truly the protectors of justice? Or were they just the smiling face of a brutal empire? When a new life-bearing planet was discovered in the galaxy, the Republic followed a disturbingly consistent pattern, one that exposed its colonizing nature. Step 1. Survey the planet and identify its intelligent species. Step 2. Choose a race among them, typically the one most culturally or politically aligned with the Republic's ideals. Step 3. Arm them, fund them, elevate them to power. And then, these chosen races would begin to slaughter the others. Entire civilizations, erased in the name of peace, democracy, and progress. After the bloodshed, the remaining race would petition to join the Republic, democratically, and the Republic would grant them citizenship, as if nothing had happened. But that's not all. If the planet's native species were too primitive to negotiate with, or if the natural resources were too valuable to leave in local hands, then the planet was colonized directly by humans. No negotiations, no treaties, just occupation, slavery, and genocide. The planet would be terraformed using ancient and powerful technology, altering its atmosphere to suit human biology. This effectively exterminated entire native populations that couldn't survive the change, or forced them into slavery. Even after slavery was abolished by the Republic, these original inhabitants remained a permanent underclass, stripped of autonomy, resources, and dignity on the very worlds they once ruled. And who enabled all of this? The Jedi Order. They weren't passive observers. They were the armed enforcers of Republic expansion. Wherever the Republic pointed, the Jedi followed, blades lit and ready. The Jedi liked to present themselves as monks, peaceful guardians, but in practice, they operated more like religious fundamentalists with military authority. They claimed to serve the Force, a divine energy that binds all life. But the truth is, the Jedi didn't own the Force. The Force exists in everyone. It flows through all living beings, made possible by midichlorians, microscopic life forms that create a bridge between the physical world and the Force. Across the galaxy, many different Force-sensitive sects developed independently. Some were spiritual, others were warrior cults, some were deeply philosophical. But the Jedi didn't respect any of them. Instead, they treated every other Force tradition as either inferior or a threat. And what did the Jedi do to threats? They eliminated them, often without question or hesitation. Their belief system became authoritarian. They weren't just servants of the Republic. They became the spiritual shield of the ruling class. For the political elite, they were both bodyguards and generals, weapons cloaked in robes. For the working classes and enslaved species, Jedi appeared as noble monks or liberators. But their primary allegiance was always to the Republic, its Senate, and whoever sat in power. They enforced ideological purity. If a Force sect gained influence or posed any challenge to Jedi supremacy, technologically, spiritually, or politically, that sect was labeled heretical and destroyed. This wasn't peacekeeping. It was fascism in religious clothing. Their actions, whether on distant colony worlds or during the Clone Wars, weren't about preserving balance. They were about preserving control. If you still think the Jedi were protectors of balance, consider the story of the Night Sisters of Dathomir, a powerful and ancient Force-using sect that paid the ultimate price for simply existing. The Night Sisters were more than a spiritual order. They were warriors, mystics, and masters of Force magic, a unique and potent branch of the Force, older than the Jedi themselves. Their leader, Mother Talzin, wielded this dark mysticism with such power that even Jedi Masters, like Mace Windu, struggled to defeat her, despite his training, discipline, and lightsaber. And yet, unlike the Jedi or Sith, the Night Sisters didn't seek galactic domination. They weren't conquerors. They didn't claim moral superiority. They were protectors of their own culture and the Night Brothers, their warrior kin. But there was one problem. Their homeworld, Dathomir, was poor, technologically underdeveloped, far from the core worlds of the Republic. So when the Clone Wars spread across the galaxy and Dathomir was discovered by the Republic, the Jedi saw the Night Sisters not as allies, but as a threat. A threat to their monopoly on Force knowledge. A threat to their political relevance. A threat that had to be erased. Even worse, their extermination wasn't just orchestrated by the Jedi. It was completed by Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord hiding in plain sight. But here's the catch. The Jedi never stopped it. Not because they didn't know, but because, deep down, they agreed with it. To both Jedi and Sith, the existence of a neutral, powerful Force tradition like the Night Sisters was unacceptable. Not because they were evil, but because they were independent. That's all it took. One sovereign culture, one self-sustaining belief system, one unique Force tradition, wiped from existence, and no one in the Republic stopped to ask why. Sometimes, the truth hides beneath the surface, quite literally. The planet Naboo, with its picturesque landscapes and elegant cities, seems like a peaceful jewel in the Republic's crown. But look deeper, and you'll find the scars of colonization. While human colonists flourished under the protection of the Galactic Republic and the Jedi Order, the Gungans, the native species of Naboo, were driven into hiding. But why? Why would a sentient race choose to live in submerged cities, away from the lands they once called home? The answer lies in a disturbing possibility: planetary terraforming. This technology, widely used by early human colonists before the foundation of the Republic, altered the atmospheric makeup of many planets to make them suitable for human life. But in doing so, the natural balance of native ecosystems and the survival of their inhabitants was thrown into chaos. The Gungans, likely unable to breathe the modified atmosphere, had no choice but to descend into the watery depths. Some survived, most didn't. Worse still, they were forgotten. Even the Jedi, guardians of peace and knowledge, were unaware of the Gungans' plight. When Qui-Gon Jinn first encountered Jar Jar Binks, his comment, "The ability to speak does not make you intelligent," wasn't just a slight. It was a glimpse into the deep-rooted elitism and ignorance of the Jedi Order. They didn't recognize Jar Jar's people because they had never cared to know them. The Naboo government had concealed the truth. A sentient race had once flourished on this planet. But now, they were hidden, excluded, and erased from history. Only when the colonists' own survival was at stake, when the Trade Federation threatened their cities, did they crawl back to the Gungans with pleas of alliance and offers of citizenship in the Republic. Not out of fairness, not out of justice, but out of desperation. This was not unity. This was opportunism disguised as diplomacy. What Naboo shows us is this: the Galactic Republic wasn't just built on politics and treaties. It was built on the silent suffering of the forgotten, the displaced, the erased. And the Jedi, noble as they claimed to be, walked blindly through this injustice, sometimes even enforcing it. If this is peace, whose peace is it really? Now let's shift our focus to the planet Tatooine, a name we all recognize, yet rarely question its place in the grand scheme of the galaxy. Tatooine, despite being located in the same solar system as the wealthy planet Naboo, tells a vastly different story. While Naboo basked in the comfort of lush landscapes and Republic protection, Tatooine was left in the grip of the Hutts, the most infamous crime lords in the galaxy. And what did the Galactic Republic do about this criminal stronghold? Absolutely nothing. In Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, we witness a powerful moment. Shmi Skywalker and her son, young Anakin, gaze hopefully at Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn, a stranger who, for the first time, represents the faintest glimmer of salvation. But Qui-Gon didn't come to free slaves. He landed there by accident. And that speaks volumes. This situation reveals a stark truth. The Jedi were never sent to planets like Tatooine unless it served the Republic's political interest. If the Republic wanted to annex a new planet, they deployed Jedi as spiritual guides, but also as agents of influence. These Jedi would then create loyal factions on the planet, arming them with resources and political support, ensuring swift submission to the Republic system, all under the banner of peace. But this process only applied to planets that were resource-rich and easy to control, like Naboo. Harsh, barren worlds like Tatooine, they were simply too expensive to terraform or mine. So instead of helping the people there, the Republic chose to ignore them, or worse, work with the criminal syndicates. Let's not forget, planets like Tatooine became major spice production hubs. Spice, an addictive and dangerous narcotic, was manufactured under Hutt control and distributed across the galaxy by smugglers and pirates. And it didn't end there. These lawless zones also became hotspots for the slave trade. The Chilex, for example, were widely sold and trafficked across the galaxy. And what did the supposedly just and moral Republic do about it? Nothing. In fact, the elite circles of the Republic turned a blind eye, and in many cases, benefited from this dark economy. Through secret deals and silent endorsements, they profited from slavery and spice. So what does this all mean? It means the Galactic Republic, this so-called beacon of democracy, was deeply corrupt, selectively racist, and willfully blind. It supported peace only where profit followed. It defended justice only when convenient. And all the while, it left entire planets like Tatooine to rot under criminal empires. Let's take a deeper look at the political structure of the Galactic Republic, a system that proudly claimed to represent every voice in the galaxy, but in reality, echoed only a chosen few. In the first 3 episodes of Star Wars, we're introduced to the Galactic Senate, a grand political body housed in the heart of Coruscant. At first glance, it seems like a symbol of fairness and unity. Hundreds of senators seated together, supposedly representing the interests of thousands of planets and countless species. But take a moment to ask, how can a few hundred voices claim to speak for tens of thousands of worlds? 4 entire civilizations, each with unique cultures, struggles, and histories? The answer is simple: they can't. You see, true representation in the Galactic Senate was reserved almost exclusively for the Inner Rim, the wealthiest and most developed worlds. These planets, often colonized by humans, had direct senators advocating for their interests. They were given a seat at the table, a voice in every vote, and a chance to influence galactic law. But what about the Mid-Rim? What about the Outer Rim? These regions, home to vast numbers of intelligent species and planets, were largely excluded. Instead of direct representation, they were bundled together into massive federations. These federations would send a single senator to represent dozens, sometimes hundreds, of unique worlds. And that senator's vote? It carried the same weight as any senator from the wealthy Inner Rim. Now, let's talk about exceptions, because of course, the Republic made some when it benefited them. Take Naboo, for instance, a planet technically in the Outer Rim, yet somehow granted a direct Senate seat. Why? Because Naboo was a human colony with high economic value and political loyalty. In short, Naboo served the Republic's interests, so it got special treatment. But for most other worlds in the Outer and Mid-Rims, the reality was different. These planets, often rich in natural resources but poor in political influence, were essentially forced to join trade federations. To even be considered for Senate representation, they had to pay enormous entrance fees or demonstrate massive economic potential. It was less about peace and more about profit. And who led the largest and most powerful of these federations? You guessed it, the Trade Federation. From Episode 1, we begin to see the cracks in the system. These federations, tired of being used, tired of being taxed, and tired of being silenced, began to resist. Their trade routes were overregulated. Their voices were ignored. Their people were seen as pawns. So when they started to rebel, when they began to fight back, the Republic labeled them as aggressors, as traitors, as threats to democracy. But ask yourself, was it really democracy? Because from where they stood, out in the mid and outer rims, the Republic looked less like a union of equals and more like an empire hiding behind a Senate. Now, let's shift our focus to a moment in galactic history that many fans overlook, a turning point that rewrote the rules of governance across the stars. For all its claims of liberty and peace, the Galactic Republic had long neglected the very regions that needed structure and justice the most, the Outer Rim territories. For centuries, crime syndicates like the Hutts ruled these worlds with impunity. Smuggling, slavery, and lawlessness were daily realities. And what did the Republic do? Nothing. But then, something changed. With the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Galactic Empire under Emperor Palpatine, formerly Darth Sidious, something unprecedented happened. Order was finally established in the Outer Rim. Yes, the Republic was replaced by a dictatorship, and yes, it came through deception and manipulation. But for the first time, the lawless planets, especially those ruled by the Hutts, were brought under central control. Crime syndicates were weakened. Trade became regulated. Civil infrastructure began to take form. The image of a single, powerful emperor united a fractured galaxy in a way the Republic never could. For the political elite of the Inner Rim, Palpatine was a symbol of security and strength. And for the neglected populations of the Outer Rim, he became the unlikely embodiment of law and order. Let's be clear, this didn't happen because Palpatine was merciful or just. It happened because he was ruthlessly effective. He did what the Republic and the Jedi had failed to do for thousands of years. He silenced corruption, dismantled chaotic bureaucracy, and eliminated the Jedi Order, an institution that had become dogmatic, elitist, and blind to its own failings. And here's the uncomfortable truth. When Emperor Palpatine dissolved the Senate, he didn't destroy democracy, he revealed it for what it had become, a ceremonial illusion, where the interests of the wealthy mattered more than the needs of the people. Now let's address a popular debate. What if Darth Vader had ruled instead of Palpatine? Would the galaxy have fared better? The answer, frankly, is no. Darth Vader, for all his strength and fearsome presence, was not a strategist or a statesman. His life was marked by pain, trauma, and emotional conflict. He lacked the manipulative brilliance and political mastery of his master. While Vader was the blade of the Empire, Sidious was its architect. Without Sidious' vision, there would be no Empire, only chaos in a Sith mask. But here's the most important takeaway. Under the Empire, for all its brutality, the galaxy witnessed a renaissance of order and technological advancement. The centralization of power allowed massive projects like the Death Star, horrifying in intent, yes, but awe-inspiring in engineering, to be realized. The Empire built roads, organized military logistics, and restructured planetary trade networks. By contrast, the Republic left worlds divided, corrupt, and forgotten. And if you look back even further, to the Old Republic or the ancient Sith empires, you'll notice a recurring theme. Discipline, order, and innovation thrived under centralized systems. But in the so-called free worlds of the Republic, anarchy and dysfunction prevailed. So was the Empire perfect? Far from it. Was it terrifying? Absolutely. But if we dare to see past the black and white morality of the Jedi, we find something truly provocative. Sometimes, it takes a dark vision to bring light to the forgotten corners of the galaxy. Now we arrive at what may be the most revealing and controversial truth in the entire history of the Star Wars universe. A hidden turning point where ideology, power, and propaganda reshaped the fate of the galaxy. Long before the Jedi and the Sith became enemies, there existed a single order, the Jedi. This ancient group, based on the planet Tython, understood the Force as a complete spectrum. They studied both the light and the dark, not as opposites, but as complementary forces that must remain in balance. The Jedi were not warriors of conquest or agents of control. They were seekers, philosophers, guardians of equilibrium. But Tython and the Jedi were discovered at a time of expansion. when the Galactic Republic was beginning to stretch its reach across the stars. It was a period of colonization, of empire-building masked under banners of civilization and peace. And the Republic was not alone in this ambition. Standing in its way was another ancient and powerful force, the Rakatan Infinite Empire. The Rakatans, far older and technologically superior, had built a vast dominion using the dark side of the Force. They created the first lightsabers, known as Force sabers, and had knowledge of advanced technologies and dark energy that even the Jedi of today could barely comprehend. Their empire was brutal, yes, built on slavery, conquest, and oppression. But it was also advanced, organized, and powerful. In desperation, the Galactic Republic approached the Jedi and asked them to become guardians of its cause, defenders of its colonies, warriors of its ideology. And the Jedi, perhaps believing they could bring balance, agreed. But this was a tragic miscalculation. Even with the Jedi's strength, the Republic could not withstand the might of the Rakatans. Defeat was imminent, until something mysterious occurred. The Rakatans were struck by a plague, not one that destroyed their bodies, but one that severed their connection to the Force, a virus that targeted midichlorians, the microscopic beings that form the link between life and the Force. Their empire crumbled almost overnight. The once mighty Rakatans were reduced to primitive tribes, their technology lost, their dominion shattered. The Galactic Republic, seizing the moment, expanded into the Rakatan territories and claimed victory. And then, history was rewritten. The Jedi Order, now formed from the remnants of the Jedi, preached that this fall was the will of the Force, divine judgment on a corrupted empire. A holy reckoning. But ask yourself, was it? What if it wasn't fate, but strategy? What if the Republic, after learning from the Jedi about midichlorians, engineered a virological weapon, one that could cripple the Rakatans by stripping them of their connection to the Force? If so, then this was not divine justice. It was genocide, carefully planned and executed. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. The Rakatan Empire was wrong for enslaving and conquering, but the Galactic Republic was no less wrong for colonizing, exploiting, and exterminating native populations, all while wearing the mask of justice. In other words, neither empire held the moral high ground. The Rakatans, for all their darkness, never hid their intentions. But the Republic, cloaked in diplomacy and the robes of the Jedi, committed its atrocities with the approval of the galactic community. It labeled conquest as peacekeeping and genocide as progress. This is the tragic irony. The protectors of balance, the Jedi, became tools of imbalance. The Jedi Order that followed became a shield not for justice, but for a republic that would go on to repeat the same sins it once condemned. In the end, the fall of the Rakatans was not simply a victory for light over dark. It was the beginning of a galaxy governed by illusion, where history was written by the victors and the truth buried beneath the rubble of forgotten worlds. After the sudden collapse of the Rakatan Empire, the Galactic Republic wasted no time consolidating its victory. But something else was happening behind the scenes. A transformation that would change the entire legacy of the Force in the galaxy. The Republic, now fearing the destructive potential of the dark side, which they had witnessed in the hands of the Rakatans, issued a critical demand. The ancient Jedi Order must abandon the dark side entirely. Their justification? The dark side breeds ambition, hunger for power, and chaos, traits they claimed had doomed the Rakatan race. But beneath this surface-level morality was something far more political and strategic. The Republic, now relying on Force wielders for its protection, wanted absolute control. If the Jedi retained their balance between light and dark, they might one day turn against their political masters, just as the Rakatans once had. So, the Jedi were forced to fragment. The Order was restructured, purified, and rebranded. From this change emerged the Jedi Order, guardians sworn to serve the Republic and walk the light alone. But not all Jedi accepted this exile of balance. Those who refused to abandon the dark side, those who believed the Force was not light or dark, but whole, were labeled heretics. The Republic and the Jedi branded them Dark Jedi, cast them out, and silenced their voices. Driven from the core worlds, these exiled Force users fled into the unexplored Outer Rim. There, on a remote and harsh world called Moraband, they encountered an ancient species, the Sith. Now, the Sith were not simply followers of darkness. They were a native race with deep spiritual knowledge of the dark side, developed through force-based alchemy and rituals. Though primitive in technology, they had long studied the mystical energies of their world. The Dark Jedi, instead of conquering them, shared their knowledge. They trained the Sith, learned from them in return, and ultimately merged their philosophies. From this union, the Sith Lords were born, a new order, powerful, complex, and, in many ways, closer to the original Jedi than the Jedi themselves. Because unlike the Jedi, who blindly severed themselves from half the Force, the Sith sought understanding of both aspects. Yes, they favored the dark side, but their roots were not in domination alone. They were trying to reclaim the lost knowledge that the Republic had forbidden, to restore the balance that the Jedi had betrayed. And so, in a twist of galactic irony, the true heirs to the Jedi legacy were not the Jedi, who bowed to political fear and religious dogma, but the Sith, the very ones whom the Republic demonized. They embraced passion, individuality, and balance, even if their path was often corrupted by pain and vengeance. Still, they remembered what the Jedi had forgotten. The Force is one. Light and dark are its breath. Without both, there is no balance. The Jedi had become tools. The Sith became seekers. Which one, then, truly carried the will of the Force? Let's talk about something that Star Wars rarely dares to address directly. Something buried beneath robes, lightsabers, and the illusion of peace. The Jedi were child abusers. Now, that might sound harsh at first, but let's strip away the myth and look at the reality. The Jedi Order only recruited children, usually no older than 5 years old. Why? Not because it was best for the children, but because children are malleable. Young enough not to question, young enough to be shaped into perfect believers, into perfect tools. Take Anakin Skywalker, for example. Even at just 9 years old, the Jedi High Council almost rejected him, not because he lacked talent, but because he was too old. Too old to be trusted with free thought. Too old to form emotional attachments. The very thing the Jedi feared most. The Jedi claimed their path was free of emotion, attachment, and fear. But the truth is, they were terrified of anyone who might think or feel differently. And where did they get these children? Mostly from the Outer Rim, the forgotten edge of the galaxy. Worlds scarred by poverty, slavery, and war. Families would give up their children, hoping for a better future, not realizing they were handing them over to an order that would erase their identities and cut all ties to their families. The Jedi weren't building heroes. They were building soldiers, devoted not to justice, but to the ideals of a decaying republic. But there were exceptions. Rare Jedi who did know the galaxy. Take Count Dooku. Born into one of the wealthiest families in the galaxy, he knew firsthand the rot at the heart of the Republic. He saw the corruption in the Senate, the backroom deals, the exploitation of the Outer Rim, and he saw how blindly the Jedi defended it all. Dooku's disillusionment didn't end with him. He passed it to his student, Qui-Gon Jinn, a rogue Jedi, a questioner, a man who listened more to the will of the Force than to the Jedi Code. Qui-Gon passed those doubts to his apprentice, Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan, in turn, would train Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One. Anakin's journey was different. His fall wasn't born from power hunger, it was born from loss. When his mother was kidnapped and tortured by Sand people, Anakin, a powerful Jedi, could not save her. She died in his arms. And in that moment, something shattered in him. He asked the question that the Jedi feared most. If we serve only the political elite, and we cannot even protect the ones we love, then what is the point of being the guardians of the galaxy? That question echoed through Anakin's soul, and eventually, it burned down the Jedi Temple. Dooku, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Anakin, 4 Jedi, each shaped by their doubts, each breaking, piece by piece, the illusion that the Jedi were always right. And in their own ways, each one helped bring about the fall of the Jedi Order and the corrupt Republic it served. So ask yourself, were they traitors, or were they the only ones brave enough to see the truth? And now, let's address the inevitable argument, the one always thrown like a lightsaber in defense of the Jedi Order and the Rebellion. But what about the Death Star? What about Alderaan? Yes, the destruction of Alderaan was horrifying, unquestionably tragic. But if you believe that one act alone justifies painting the Empire as pure evil, then you've already been trapped by rebel propaganda. Let's look deeper. The construction of the Death Star didn't begin after the rebellion. It began long before, at the end of Episode 3. Its true origin, not to destroy planets for power, but to defend the galaxy from something far more terrifying. The Yuuzhan Vong, an extragalactic species immune to the Force, with bioweapons capable of wiping out entire civilizations. The Death Star was a desperate response to an existential threat the public never even knew existed. So, who were the rebellion? Were they noble freedom fighters, heroes of the people, or were they terrorists? Let's look at the facts. They engaged in smuggling, piracy, illegal arms trafficking, and forged alliances with crime lords like the Hutts. Many of them were religious fanatics, clinging to the old Jedi Order that had already failed the galaxy once before. Their leaders, wealthy oligarchic families like House Organa, weren't fighting for justice. They were fighting to regain the power they lost under the Empire. And when they struck, they didn't discriminate. The rebellion destroyed civilian infrastructure, sabotaged critical trade routes, and endangered the lives of billions. And yet they are hailed as liberators. Why? Because they won. Let me remind you, during the Clone Wars, an entire alliance of thousands of planets rose against the corrupt Galactic Republic. They were called separatists, and they were dismissed as villains. But that alliance was far more legitimate, far more organized, and far more representative than any rebellion during the Empire. So here's the hypocrisy. A rebellion of a few dozen extremist cells is praised as heroic, but a coalition of thousands of planets is condemned as unjust. Let's talk about the Death Star. Yes, millions died. But ask yourself, who were they? Not just soldiers, not just stormtroopers. The vast majority were engineers, scientists, technicians, and workers. People who maintained systems, fed the crew, designed navigation, repaired droids. They were not combatants. They were the infrastructure of the Empire. And yet the rebels celebrated their deaths. Did they apologize to the families of those workers? Did they show any remorse? No. And the injustice didn't end there. After the Empire fell, the New Republic didn't offer amnesty. It didn't offer rehabilitation. Instead, it persecuted infrastructure workers of the Empire, men and women who had worked in shipyards, research facilities, communications networks, and even schools and hospitals. These people were not villains. They were citizens of the only functioning government they had ever known. But the New Republic imprisoned them, banished them, or forced them into labor colonies, not just in the Mid-Rim, but even in Outer Rim territories, where they became the galaxy's new underclass. Their only crime? Working for the Empire. So ask yourself, was the rebellion about freedom? Or was it about revenge and power? Because when the smoke cleared and the old elite returned, the very same bureaucrats, nobles, and oligarchs who once ruled the corrupt Galactic Republic, they did exactly what they always did. They rewrote the story. They told you who the heroes were. They told you who to hate. And the galaxy cheered. So ask yourself, were the Jedi truly the guardians of peace and justice? Or were they the foot soldiers of a violent regime? A force used to wipe out cultures, suppress beliefs, and maintain control over the galaxy? In the end, maybe the Jedi weren't the light after all. If this made you question what you thought you knew about Star Wars, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Were the Jedi peacekeepers or galactic enforcers?